Afternoon. Welcome, welcome. We see folks that are entering the waiting room, and so we'll just give folks a couple minutes to get settled in and to allow their audio and video to kick in. This is wonderful. So it's a peaceful, foggy morning where we are here, and I can't imagine a better place to be. Okay. Well, it's 10:01 and folks are still gathering. So I think one of the things that we can begin with as we're all getting settled together is a welcome and a little bit of sort of coordination and instructions, and a place setting, a moment setting. So I am so very happy and honored to have been asked to facilitate this session, because worker ownership sits at the heart of one of my great hopes for our post-capitalist future. My name is Leila Roberts, and you have entered the session that we optimistically titled Own Your Own Economy, Worker Ownership. If you would like to weigh in on anything, have a question, or just have a thought, I understand that because this produces a better recording quality, it's best to use the chat box for that purpose. And at this point, it's a shock whenever I meet someone who hasn't used Zoom before. But just in case, if you haven't, if you hover your little mousey down at the bottom of your screen, one of the little icons that will show up is a speech box with the word chat below it. If you click on it, a chat box will open up somewhere on your screen and will allow you to type in a question, a comment. I invite you right now, if you're willing, to share your name, any organizational affiliation you want to mention. And if you feel like being contacted and you're willing to share some form of contact information, I understand that the chat boxes will be captured for posterity. So part of the purpose here is to create an ecosystem, and ecosystems require interconnections. Okay, I've stopped seeing the flashing light that says people are being admitted. So let's kick it off. Again, if you just joined us, my name is Leila Roberts, and I am speaking to you from the ancestral homeland, unceded and stolen, of the Wiyaq people. My particular home is called Rakelchirich Hulumolir, which means wolf's home, which is an important place in this people's stories. And it is an extraordinary and a sacred place to live. I am so grateful to be here, and I invite you all to visit us in Humboldt, California, if you're ever so moved. One of the things that we want to kick off with is an invitation to introduce yourself. So if you're just joining us, feel free to do that in the chat box. The second thing that we'd like to do is invite you to tell us, a little bit about you. I'm launching a poll right now that asks a couple of questions. Which of these best describes you? Are you here as a curious participant? Are you a business owner? This is all that apply. Are you a curious employee in this moment? Are you a business consultant? Are you an economic activist for a solidarity economy? Are you a cooperator in a worker-owned enterprise yourself? Are you a student in exploration mode? Which is one of the things I would say I am right now. The next question is, how much experience do you already have with worker cooperatives? Have you heard about them? Have you read about them? Have you practiced formal cooperation a little bit in the past, or are you currently a cooperator in a worker-owned enterprise? Or none, which is good too. Okay, I am seeing the results coming in. We have a pretty good number. And it looks like we're tending towards students in exploration mode. Hey, me too. As well as a lot of curious participants, and no surprise for this conference, economic activists, folks practicing solidarity economy in their lives and in their envisioning. All right. How much experience do you have? This matters because we're going to talk a little bit about the cooperative principles and practices. A lot who have some exposure, but not a lot of direct experience, which is fun. Good. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results so that you can glance through one another's input here. And as you're doing that, I'll just dive in here to the second portion, which is, Rebecca, I'm going to introduce our co-panelists formally in a moment, but right now I would love to just ask you to show your faces and wave a little bit so people know who I mean when I say your name. Rebecca Lurie, please say hey.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you. Sadé Swift, are you there?
Hey.
Oh, there you are. Please, everyone, admire that gorgeous background. We're all super jelly. And Tobin, McKee, there you are.
Hi, everybody.
Great. Okay. So, Rebecca, I think you're going to take us into a little bit of a Jamboard brainstorm. We're going to experiment with technology here to the extent you're comfortable with it. All you.
Great. Welcome, everybody. And it's delightful for me to travel from Brooklyn, New York, Lenape, Canarsie territory to yours on the West Coast as the hosts. And a good morning or good afternoon. I just placed in the chat a Jamboard. If this were the olden days, we would have a wall that we would all share in a large room, and we'd be getting out the Post-its, thanks to 3M with their little sticky pieces, and we'd be, or our markers on the whiteboard, and we'd be placing some ideas up on that shared board. And today, the Jamboard is really, what is a worker cooperative? But this is to elicit from you what you believe, what you know, what you hope. Just put on this, and if you've never used the Jamboard before, it looks like a wall with sticky notes. You can open it up and you can start writing in any one of those sticky notes or start a new one, which is, there's an icon on the left up towards the bottom with a little T, and you can add a sticky note. There are 4 pages. You can go, spread out. You can make your sticky note very large. I might say, for instance, on the Jamboard, I might go ahead and write, instead of right here, I might say a cooperative is love. And then I'll put that up there and you can see what that looks like. And I want to invite people to please keep doing that. And we can also use the chat. So go ahead. One of the great ways to sort of elicit our shared thinking is literally to elicit our shared thinking. And so there's also the chat. And put things there, and we can all start looking at some of those ideas that are coming forward of what is a co-op. Well, thanks for putting that on the shared screen.
Yeah, for those who are, not having a great time playing with the technology, you can at least watch us play and see how it looks.
And perhaps that should have been something I did, but, we're all learning as we go. Please add, voices are heard, collective decision-making, a cooperation as a community, not just a place of business. More ideas of what is a co-op, worker co-op. So while people populate that, which is really going to be something we can then share and reference back, not just during our workshop today, but in the future. Let's see, what else have people put in? So what I'm going to do is share now what are some principles of worker co-ops. But I want to just make sure if people are adding that they can keep going into that. And I'm going to bring up a wonderful little presentation on what is a worker co-op. Hang on while I bring that up. And really, this is a wonderful prezi that Leila shared. That goes over the 7 principles of co-ops. So there is something called the International Cooperative Alliance that's actually got a very long tenure working around the globe with co-ops of all sorts. And they've established clearly that there are 7 principles, no matter what type of co-op you may be interested in. And today's workshop is a lot about a worker co-op. There's housing co-ops, land trusts, there's cooperative banks, sometimes there's producer co-ops, farm co-ops. We can go through a list. Businesses can purchase together as purchasing co-ops or marketing co-ops, but there are principles that in a co-op, whoever is considered the members, the us of the we, would apply to these, would comport with these 7 principles. And if it's hard to see, I'll read them for a minute. Voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, members' economic participation. And let me just pause. Those 3 refer to membership. So there's who is the we in the us of this co-op. Again, voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, members' economic participation. And then there's autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. People can learn a lot more about these principles over time, but they work very well around the globe for folks who say we're in a co-op. This is what they all agree to. And what I'll share as a piece of information is there are over 1 billion members of co-ops on the planet, which I think is a very important thing to note, that I consider cooperativism a hidden, a buried treasure that we are busy sort of dusting off and bringing to the fore. So of those billion members, I think I may count for 3, because I am a member of 3 different types of co-ops, a food co-op, a worker co-op, and a second food co-op. But think of in those terms. And if people are farming together in Nairobi, they are part of a co-op and they consider themselves a co-op through these principles, they would be part of that billion membership. Turn it over to Leila.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Appreciate it. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, just pausing a moment, and keep it coming. This is great. We have a remarkable collection of minds in the virtual room. So I'm looking forward to the half an hour or so of discussion that we're going to have towards the end. Okay, so we're going to segue a little bit into some introductions and some framing. I'll start by introducing myself, offer a little framing, outline the session, and then formally introduce our panelists. If I know many of the names, actually, I'm recognizing some of you, but many don't know. I am Leila Roberts. My day job, which is also a tactical choice in a in an anti-capitalist, in the anti-capitalist work, is I am director of something called the North Coast Small Business Development Center. This is one of 1,200 or so federally funded nonprofits that uses taxpayer dollars to support small businesses in starting and growing. And I specifically, I smile when I say this, but it's deadly serious. I specifically chose this role for, among other reasons, to essentially infiltrate the status quo. I thought, hey, there's nearly $500,000 coming into this community to the business community. And I wonder if I can co-opt at least some of that to support the growth of a worker-owned ecosystem in our small rural community between the Redwoods and the Pacific Ocean. So it's an experiment. So as strange as it might seem, that is the position I'm holding now as a student and experimenter. And I'll tell you, it is both joyful work and extremely painful to be embedded in the status quo, as you can imagine. So why facilitate this session? It's because I'm very curious to know what all of you envision as your place in the work towards growing a worker-owned ecosystem. Here's a story from this work. Last year, I was invited to talk about worker ownership to a group of county and municipal leaders who are on the board of directors for a local economic and business lending institution. I introduced the talk with a quip. I said, worker ownership is the oldest newfangled idea in business. And to this board of all white, mostly men people, I said, your great-great-great-grandfathers were probably involved in a cooperative of one sort or another. And then my co-presenter and I talked about all of the benefits to a community, to family financial security, and even to democracy of employee ownership. They seemed enthusiastic. We could have also mentioned that platform numbers 7 and 8 of the Movement for Black Lives specifically addressed cooperatives and in a more transformational way. It's a brilliant platform, by the way. I hope you'll check it out at m4bl.org. But we didn't, because we're sort of in an interstitial place. What was the point of this briefing then? They are allies in building a post-capitalist world. They're not, of course, but they are part of our local context. And so we stay in relationship with them, and we watch carefully what they do and say, since they have power in our community. We keep our channels of communication open and clear and ready to be used while remaining awake. So I say that in order to express the both and nature of my intention setting here. We want to grow the sector of worker-owned, worker-led cooperatives. We want worker ownership, cooperator-ness, not employee-ness, to make up a significant part of our economic activity. Not the only part. We're not excluding mutual aid, community ownership, barter, savings circles, fair trade, and other forms that are still to be envisioned as we work to reclaim our commons and re-internalize on our balance sheets all of the costs of economic activity. But one of the things that's coming clear to me is that growing this worker-owned ecosystem requires us to try lots of approaches. Take a lesson from the great teacher and scientist and ecosystem activist Vandana Shiva, she says, take your social change lessons from nature through localism and pluralism. Localism, say, because the overall framework of a co-op or a strategy to grow co-ops can look the same, at least in this country, thanks to shared laws and taxes, the way capital flows right now, the way markets work. But the local context shapes how it grows. New York, Northampton, Mass, Jackson, Mississippi, Humboldt, California, Detroit, Michigan. This work is all happening now. And pluralism, because a diversity of tactics allows us to experiment, to grow what works, to prune what doesn't. And so this is sort of a joke, but not a joke. It's a teaching story from the psychologist and Buddhist instructor Tara Brach. There are 3 storefronts on Main Street selling very similar products. One day, the storefront on the left posts a sign saying, "Rock bottom prices." A couple days later, a sign appears in the storefront on the right, reading, "Best prices in town." Confused by these aggressive tactics from her neighbors, the owner of the store in the middle thinks about it for a couple of days and then puts up her own sign in all capitals, "Main entrance." So you can draw what lesson you like from that story. One lesson to me is that in a multiplicity of so-called solutions, we want to claim the main entrance, we who are anti-capitalist, pro-solidarity economy. We want to look at the non-democratic employee-owned businesses in this country and talk clearly about what they do and don't accomplish towards our aims. We want to look at the tiny, under-resourced cooperatives competing against unfair and skewed odds and look very clearly at why they're succeeding or not succeeding and how we can clear away barriers. And I also want us to look clearly at the fact that we are not building in a utopia or a vacuum. We are flawed ones building in a flawed system. We are dismantling structures of oppression in a political economy that depends on those structures to function. If we remove those structures, profit, privately owned public goods, authoritarian, white supremacist, misogynist hierarchies at work, what are we left with? What healing and resilient structures are we creating now? These are revolutionary questions. And they're being answered in many other ways. Even before prison abolition is achieved, we have restorative justice models working everywhere. Before the reparations and land back movements win, we have towns and private landowners returning what their ancestors stole, atoning. So there are employee-owned enterprises that replicate command and control management, that allow racist and misogynist microaggressions, that pursue extractive and harmful business models, and that employ both cooperators as co-owners and employees who don't co-own or co-lead the enterprise. It's a bit of a mess. So I encourage us to rest in the both and, in the disharmony, so that we can, to mix metaphors, prune. And to remember that culture is sticky, it's resilient. To remember that capitalists will defend their interests partly by undermining the opposition, and that inertia is a force to watch carefully in ourselves and as much as in the world. So I would like to finish with an invitation, a quote from an essay that Adrienne Maree Brown, the powerful and beautiful thinker and activist, offered in an essay from last week, I believe it was, called Disrupting the Pattern, A Call for Love and Solidarity. She brought forth the words of our movement's grandmother, Grace Lee Boggs. Movement can be a balm to systemic wounds, but it doesn't make those of us in movement immune to the patterns of pain and harm with which those systems function. In fact, all of us move through the world perpetuating these systems in a variety of ways. And if we forget this, we can lose touch with a crucial aspect of the work, our self-transformation, and our responsibility, not just for what we say, but for how we are. This is why Grace Lee Boggs said we must transform ourselves to transform the world. We are in and of these systems. So with that in mind, we're going to have a conversation today about the practicalities of worker ownership. How does working cooperatively help us prefigure the world we want to create? So our panel will talk about cooperation as an economic justice strategy, a meaningful way of creating community in the workplace, and a mechanism for self-transformation as well. Rebecca is going to start with our systems and strategies view. Tobin will talk about power and relationships and shared governance, and Sadé will reground us in our heart-centered spaces, the internal transformation. They're going to share both observations and stories because they have all lived the cooperator life. And we will end each portion with a call to action and reflection, praxis. And we're hoping for an open discussion at the end. So, very happy to introduce Rebecca Lurie, who founded the Community and Worker Ownership Project in 2016 at CUNY, City University of New York, the School for Labor and Urban Studies. It's designed to enhance learning and praxis in cooperative management skills. Throughout her career, she's focused on ways that workers could find opportunity and inclusion to good jobs, using education as a vehicle at every level. Beginning as a union carpenter, developing pre-apprenticeship programs in the building trades and green jobs, she has been dedicated to inclusive community development and popular education. Rebecca was on the founding board of the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative, served as board president for the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture, and currently is on the board of Democracy at Work, the Democracy at Work Institute, DAWI, and the executive council of the Union Co-ops Council of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. She holds a master's in organizational change management from the New School, a certificate in adult occupational education from CUNY, and is certified in permaculture urban design. She's a native New Yorker raised amidst community activism during the civil rights era and exudes a passion and dedication to social justice. I love your bio, Rebecca. So please, will you get us started?
Thank you so much. That bio feels a little long, but now you know me. Now I feel seen. So there you go. Thank you, Leila, for that great lead up. And if I say nothing more, it's the only laws that matter at the end of the day are nature's laws. Let's remember that. Adrienne Marie Brown does a great job of writing about that, as does Vandava Shiva, as does Grace Lee Boggs. And so many people just follow any of our indigenous folks who are preaching what they already know, nature's laws. But we live in an economic system that's called capitalism, with a lot of other laws that sort of can get in the way or control. So I'm going to take a few minutes to frame how I frame cooperative economics. Sometimes I refer to it as economic democracy. And also a lot of people are now really using solidarity economy. I'm not going to differentiate between them. I don't think we need to. I'll say any of these frames can work and we can talk about it. But I've discovered a lot in my pathway into doing this work, where I'm doing more teaching and promoting, that I want to start with what is an economy. And I know it is, the system of the home, when you unwrap the Latin words. I think that was even referenced by David Cobb yesterday in one of the workshops. So I want to, say that, and this is how I describe it. An economy is simply the production and distribution of the stuff that we need. Again, the production and distribution of the stuff that we need. And it's so easy for me to really sort of harken back to an ancestral thought of when we lived very close to the land and our farms, our gardens were feeding us. We're producing with the earth those things that we need. And we're distributing what we have. We might be distributing some of the extra. We might call it surplus. Capitalism has begun to call that profit, and they've capitalized it in such a way that makes that the thing. But we live in a capitalist economy, but right now we want to talk about a cooperative economy. So what makes something cooperative rather than capitalist is a lot of sharing the surplus, recognizing that we amongst us have all the things we need to produce and distribute what we need. But the principles of cooperativism matter, because that's where we end up with more of a sharing or a solidarity approach. Using the terms economic democracy as a way to think about this, I say there are really two guide rails to this economy, a cooperative economy, two guide rails we should pay attention to. And those are democracy and transparency. And democracy is very hard to practice deeply with all of the oppression behind us and within us, and more capitalism and imperialism and patriarchy. And we can go on down the list. Sometimes I refer to it as institutionalized betterism. Institutionalized for, rank people better and worse. And that makes it really hard for people to show up and be democratic, because they're not coming with the full openness of nurturing their full spirit to show up and say what they know, think, want. So practicing democracy can be very hard if we don't have a lot of principles and practice and protocol around us to welcome the full human. And this even goes into the fact that there's generational trauma that's all around us in preparation today. Before we came on screen, we shared a moment of grief that we can hold. And when people are holding that intergenerational grief, it's hard to sort of show up with your full self. So healing becomes part of democracy. And how do we heal in place where we go, sometimes where we go to work? And the other part is transparency, understanding what it is we got. Going back to my garden analogy, if I produced a lot of zucchini this summer and I'm hoarding it behind a corner of my yard and nobody can see it, not much happening with all of that extra surplus. But if I say, look at what I have, who needs more? There's an ability to share. So I want to really think that these two guide rails, and I'm using the metaphors of the garden, but and pain and suffering to understand democracy means how do we show up fully? Transparency means how do we really make sure we understand what it is we got? A story I have there is an organization I was involved in that had a big election coming up around a big asset, whether to sell their asset. And a couple days before the election, they sent a lot of documents, must have been 6 different Google Docs. It was a lot of material. And the claim was, now you have all the information you need to make the vote tomorrow. But I felt like that wasn't really good transparency because we couldn't pull it apart. It was too much information. And so part of our job as cooperators is to make sure everybody understands the information that's before us. In cooperative education, it means helping people understand a spreadsheet and how to understand the profit and loss statements and how to put together a budget and how to manage to that budget. So these are things that empower people also, if you understand it, with transparency, with education, to enable a deeper sense of democracy. So the two guide rails being transparency, democracy, that really helps as a guideline when we start to apply those 7 principles we shared earlier. The last thing I'll share, and it's really another big part of what I want to share, Leila, you can help me with my timekeeping because I think as I speak I might lose track. But I'll look at you for that. We've done a lot of looking at who teaches co-ops, what do we need to teach, how do cooperative businesses, and what do they need to succeed? And this is after also learning sort of business 101, traditionally speaking. What's a business plan? How do you make a business succeed? And we've identified this, and I describe it in 3 icons: the globe, the heart, and the hands. And I like to use the icons because I like to be really transparent about this. We don't have to read deep-seated documents. We can really talk about this. The globe is, how does your business or operation or entity relate to the bigger economy, the political economy? How do you understand all the impacts for your business when you want it to succeed in relationship to the political economy around you? We have rapid change happening in the legalization of cannabis. What does that mean? That's a political economy. How do we make sure our businesses can succeed in the cannabis economy if we're not also influencing and shaping some of the rules and the guidelines in that bigger economy? So understanding the globe says, let's make sure we understand the politics of the place, which also means capitalism and the system of America's democracy at this time. How do we put people in positions of legislative power? How do we influence legislation for the industries that we need and want where we exist? A very lived experience that I've been close to is with Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx. And Cooperative Home Care Associates is the largest worker co-op in the country. It's 36 years old. It's started with 12 women and now has over 2,000 workers. More than half of them are worker owners, as that becomes an option for membership. And about 15 years into their existence, they decided to approach SEIU 1199, the union that supports healthcare workers, because they realized that they were so controlled by the public policy for their sector of home care. And it was so controlling and did not leave room for innovation. They needed to influence that. And so they joined a bigger player in the political economy, the union, came up with a union contract, but also initiated a labor management committee so they could influence some legislation and regulation around home care. It's an example of a business wanting to have a relationship to the political economy. Believe me, capitalists got this all figured out. There are industry associations and lobbying firms writ large, as we all know. How do we begin to legislate and lobby for our own needs? The businesses need to have a relationship to that. That's understanding the globe, in the globe, heart and hands. The heart, thank you, Leila. The heart is really the one that I say is about the people. And I know that both Sadé and Tobin are going to speak more on this, so I'm going to limit how much I say on this. But what I want to say is, and I already did reference sort of healing our trauma, it's also how do we manage the people in this entity? And I say entity, but we're referring to cooperative businesses, but it could be anything. If I have my kids are forming a club and I want to help them figure out how to run it democratically, I'm going to say, and cooperatively, I'm going to say, are you listening to everybody? Does everybody have a voice? How, the protocol of sitting in a circle becomes a very interesting way to sort of elicit everybody's thoughts and heart and presence. And so how do we set up a set of procedures, praxis to engage everybody who shows up? In one of my classes this week on co-ops, we did a deep dive into sociocracy, which is a tool anyone can learn about. It's very popular in cooperative management. And sociocracy uses the circles, lots of little circles interconnected with other circles, interconnected with each other. And I use a diagram often of Queen Anne's lace as an image to show how all these different circles connect. You can be in one circle, but it's connecting to the other. And it helps to think that a lot of the way we operate is metaphoric, or even, let me go further than a metaphor, actually fractal for what we intend. So a little of this here, a little of that here, a little of that here. Eventually we have a beautiful Queen Anne's lace flower, or something else that looks like an interconnected web of listening and presence, even though no one of us can listen to everybody at the same time. We're setting up an environment for that. So the icon of the heart is really all of the practice there. But it can get very messy inside a business, right? Because at the end of the day, you got to make the eagle fly on Friday, as they say. People got to get paid. You're producing, name it. I'll go back to zucchini. You're producing zucchini. If that zucchini rotted on the vine, we failed as a business. We weren't able to get our surplus out the door. So it's important to understand that we need a system of check and balances that includes the active listening, but also means ready for continuous improvement, ready to hear what went wrong. That's a lot of conflict resolution, compassionate presence. And the third and final piece of this, these icons, heart, globe, heart, and hands, are the hands. And the hands are two. One hand is the practical skill of the business. If we're a construction company, we got to know how to do construction, and enough people have to know how to do it well for it to succeed. So the training for the business becomes very important, making sure you have entry points and career advancement and people and learning tools for people to really understand how to do it. But the other hand is a very important hand for a lot of us who might by nature be anti-capitalist. We're not always thinking about how to run the finances of the business. But I have another hand. Sometimes when I draw this, I put the money symbol over that other hand. And I say, do you know how to handle the money? Not everybody has to know everything in this business. But in a cooperative business that is going to be effective, you need at least somebody keeping an eye on that, the globe, the legislation, the regulation for which you have to comport at this time, and the changes you may want to make. The heart, how are you running the people of this business? How are you managing each other? And then how are you managing the finances? And you want enough education and transparency so everybody can feel engaged and a part of that. I think I'll leave it there and on to the next. I think those three icons for me help me always check when someone says they want to start a business. I say, are you paying attention to these things? Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for the interesting back and forth in the chat. I'm catching a couple of things that we'll definitely want to talk about at the end. Oh, Tobin, you found it. White supremacy culture. I'm looking at a similar but related doc just for that. So yay. Nice. Okay, so on that note, yeah. Yes, check the chat thread for resources, and we'll be putting more in there as we go back and forth. So meanwhile, let's segue. Tobin McKee is also in this community, and I have the honor and joy of cooperating and learning with them. Tobin's a program administrator at worker-owned Humboldt, which is a collaboration between Cooperation Humboldt and the North Coast Small Business Development Center, but really is its own sort of movement and effort. It incubates new worker-owned cooperatives and facilitates the conversion of existing businesses to worker ownership. And Tobin is also a cooperator. He's a co-owner at Full Cycle Compost, a bicycle-powered composting co-op, and a co-director at Middle Way Network, fostering the development of free wellness education and services for underserved populations. Tobin, I am really excited to hear what you have to say. Welcome.
Thanks, Leila, and hi, everybody. Really happy to be here. And my job is very grassroots. I sit with groups of people who want to start co-ops, and I help us to unlearn all the things that we learned in school and relearn how to cooperate. And I think sometimes, we operate under the notion that cooperation is something that we learned in preschool. We have to cooperate with each other. We have to get along. We have to share. But because of that, that early experience, I think we may assume that we know how to cooperate. But then when it comes down to actually sharing power in a group, we recognize that we don't have the skills, and in most cases. And the reason that we don't have the skills is because of our complete immersion in a non-cooperative way of life. And an example that I like to give is we really, in the United States, have, maybe not as many of us on this call, but there is a notion that we have a democracy, and that is a central pillar of freedom, and that it's what makes America great. Sorry for that. And so that's some sort of an American value. And then we go to work, where we have a boss who tells us what to do and controls our money and our choices. And everybody here has been in that situation. Even if you have a kind and compassionate and generous boss, you still are working for somebody who holds ultimate decision-making power and fiscal responsibility. And then and of course, if you have an exploitive multinational corporation as your boss, then you're getting into a whole bigger mess. And when I talk to folks about worker-owned cooperatives, one of the most common things that people push back on me against is, I just want to show up to work. I don't want to have the responsibility and all the meetings and all the paperwork. I don't want to be an owner, because being an owner is onerous, because being an owner is all this, like, I'm going to have to go to work and do my 9-to-5 job for minimum wage, and then also take care of the bookkeeping and things like that. And the reality of true cooperation is different. It is not more work. It is more power, more decision-making power, and statistically more money, higher wages, better benefits, and a sense of meaning and purpose. I was recently just having a conversation with somebody about this. They pushed back with I just want to show up with work. And then when we talked about it more, they actually reflected on a job where the employees were expected to take more responsibility. And that was the job that they liked the best. That was the job that they wanted to show up to more. And they recognized that the employees at that workplace stayed on longer. So rather than being a seasonal job, people stayed and came and stayed. And so you have a deeper sense of purpose, belonging, and participation in your work. And sometimes we use the language, we say that, we're cooperating from a feminist perspective. And I just want to ground that outside the notions of the gender that you're born with at birth, or that you have been identified with at birth, and instead look at it from the perspective of patriarchy as a part of the capitalist system that is completely set on the enclosure of wealth. And one of the things that we do is we are deeply ingrained and trained to believe that success equals the greater and greater enclosure of wealth. I am successful, I am wealthy when I get the most money. And if we look from an ecological perspective, when we look at an eco-social perspective, when we look at any perspective that involves caring, compassion, community, we see that wealth and success is shared wealth and shared success. And to let go of the idea that, I need to enclose the most wealth for myself, and I need to be the top, and I need to be the best, and my business needs to be the best, and the notion that my business needs to compete with others, and all of the principles that we're used to thinking have space for transformation in the context of worker-owned cooperatives. and notions of leadership and what it means to be a leader. So we have a definition. A leader is the person who takes up the most space in the room. The leader is the person who talks the most. The leader is the person with the most education. The leader is typically the white male person in the room. There are so many ingrained definitions of leadership that we need to unpack, that we need to look at. And one of the processes that we see in working with worker-owned cooperatives is that either it's a conversion or somebody who wants to start their own cooperative, is that the notion of leadership gets in the way of true cooperation because people don't see themselves as leaders, or they don't recognize that the qualities that they already possess, the quiet, thoughtful person, the person who has a lot of random, disconnected, incoherent ideas is actually really, really valuable, because they are the ones who come up with something new and different. So there's all different kinds of behaviors that we don't identify as leadership qualities. And those behaviors and those types of input are disempowered. So I'll give you an example. We're working with a worker cooperative right now. It's a small business. They're in conversion. The owner wants to become a worker-owned cooperative. And the owner's reason for doing this is because they are just overwhelmed with the burden of responsibility. To put it very bluntly, it's just too much, and they recognize the value of their workers. In the context of becoming a worker cooperative, and this just happened yesterday, it was fantastic. They have been planning their conversion. They have been meeting weekly for months to plan their conversion. And now they're looking closely at the finances. COVID has been hard on the business. The finances don't look that great. They're going to go through an intensive fiscal review. And at the end of that review, they're concerned that the organization that's doing that review is going to say, this business is not viable as a worker cooperative. It's not going to be worth it to you to sell to your employees. And they're concerned about that. All of the employees came together and said, if they say that, we're still doing it. In fact, we're already doing it. We are already sharing the power. We are already sharing the decision-making responsibility. It doesn't matter what the fiscal model is. We are here with you, owner. We are taking that burden of responsibility as a team, and we're going to do this together moving forward no matter what. So that deep spirit of cooperation is the heart and the soul of a business model that's actually just, whenever you investigate it, it makes more sense. And it works in so many ways. So I wanted to just finish by talking about a notion from Mary Parker Follett, who was an economist and a labor advocate, feminist labor advocate in the early 1900s, who coined the phrase power over versus power with. And when we start to look at notions of working with and sharing power, we dismantle our tendencies toward power over. And I wanted to share with you just a couple of articles about that. So I'm going to drop that in the chat so you can read about power over versus power with. There you go. And I wanted to also say that I am not tracking the chat right now. So if you're asking me questions, I might ask Leila to follow those up. And the last thing that I want to share is, if you are interested in starting a worker cooperative or converting your existing business to worker cooperatives, or you are already converting a business and you would like support, here's access to our upcoming event. Cooperation Humboldt works in partnership with North Coast Small Business Development Center. We are so lucky to have Leila in the trenches. I feel your pain. You're amazing at doing both jobs simultaneously, revolutionary and whatever corporate paper. I don't know what to call it. You do the paperwork well.
FTP,
So thank you,
fuck the bureaucracy.
Yeah. but you're so good at it. And so I'm really happy to be here with y'all. Leila, are there questions in the chat that I should respond to?
I'm catching them for discussion later because I think they actually intersect very nicely.
Great. Well, thank you all for listening, and I look forward to hearing from Sadé next.
Thank you very much, Tobin. And I love that you mentioned the upcoming Cooperation Humboldt Worker-Owned Academy. Is it all right with you, Tobin, if we invite people to the Intro to Worker Cooperatives on May 4th? You know, whether or not they're in this community, there might be something to learn.
Yeah, and I popped that in there as well.
You did. Bless you. Thank you. Okay, I am super excited, Sadé, to hear what you have to say here, and I'm going to start with a formal introduction. Sadé Swift is a queer, Black, digital, and movement strategist who has been organizing for over 10 years. They are currently building cooperative power in multiple spaces with a particular focus on generational wealth and justice for Black folks. Sadé is a co-founder and worker owner at 2 worker-owned cooperative businesses, Cards by Day, I hope I said that right, a stationary cooperative and stationary cooperative, and Rebellious Root, a consulting cooperative working towards justice and social change through training, curriculum design, and intentional conversations. They are also the Advocacy Council coordinator at the NYC network of worker cooperatives. They strive to create spaces where a new world is imaged or imagined, I'm not sure which you meant, and achieved. Sadé, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for that introduction. I'm actually going to invite folks, if you can, turn on your camera and say hello. I love to see your beautiful faces as I'm about to share my story and how I got into this work. In another world, we will be together in the same room and able to have lunch together and be in community. And so want to be able to replicate that and see that in the digital space. Thank you all for turning on your cameras and invite you to keep them on as we continue to build. So let me share my screen. Awesome. So thank you, Leila, for introducing me. I'm going to go a little bit more deeper into who I am and why I do this work. Again, my name is Sadé Swift. I go by they, them, and she, pronouns. I identify as a Black, queer, chronically ill organizer, dreamer, artivist, cooperator, and abolitionist. A little bit about the history of me. I grew up with a young mom who often had to fight and be at the front lines of proving herself to the world that she can do things as a young mom and as a student. And also grew up with a father who was incarcerated for most of my life, which really had me in the middle of just trying to figure out what my place was in the world really young. And figuring out who are the people that I do this work for. The people that built me are my grandparents. My grandfather was a taxi driver for 40 years in New York, and my grandmother was a factory worker. And often when I think about cooperative work and I think about cooperative spaces, I think of them. And I think of the labor that they put in to the ecosystem of New York that's often left unheard of, unspoken, unknown. And I bring them into the space often. And a lot of, I'm grateful that they're still here with us, Earthside. And I often think about, the things that I want to see possible and happen in their lifetime. And what I'm striving for those things to be and for that to be realized. Want to share some of the moments that really set my heart on fire and really brought me to activism and eventually to doing cooperative work. One of those was March to Justice, which is the top image. This was a march that occurred in 2014 of 70 individuals that walked 250 miles from New York to Washington, D.C. This was an image when we were just arriving to going through Maryland. But this really, really showed me and had me experience what community felt like and looked like, and what it meant to literally put our lives on the line for something that we believed in. And we were marching to end incarceration, to end the killing of Black bodies, and found a deep sense of family on the road. The second image, which is at the bottom, was from 2016. I was the campaign manager for Adamu Baraka, the Green Party vice presidential candidate, where I got to work with David. And on that road, I learned a lot. It was a long road. It was a hard road, but I learned a lot. One of the trips that I think and know changed my life was going to Standing Rock, where I was able to be in fellowship and community with Indigenous folks, and really got to just dive into what it was that the community needed, right? One end, I was like supporting with food. On the other end, I was supporting with babysitting, but that the space allowed for filling in, right? And showing up in the things that you feel powerful in, and also being there for a cause. And it really was there that I like, went to the back seat and started to learn what it meant to learn from elders, right? And what it meant to take the lead in learning and being a student, which we talked about a little bit at the beginning. So how I got to the work of cooperation. So I was the first in my family to graduate, and while I was in school, a big part of my journey at the new school was trying to figure out how to have the school understand that I needed to have input on what I learned. And part of that was thinking about what it meant or looked like for students to have the opportunity to share what it was that they wanted to learn before the curriculum was even developed, right? And at that point, I didn't know that what I wanted to see was cooperation existing in the education realm before students got into the classroom. And I spent a long time at New School thinking about that, and specifically thinking about what it looked like to center Black folks in curriculum, and also what it looked like to have Black students taking on the role of educating, right, the new school body, and that's I think that's where this journey started, and continued. Some of the other things that got me into this work were realizing that I was burnt out, and realizing that the nonprofit industrial complex was real, and existed in my body in ways that I did not want. And the way that I was going to get out of that was to create something new and to create something that was mine, and that I get to set on my own terms. The next thing was realizing that if I wanted a new world, I had to be a part of building it, right? That it wasn't just about sharing my opinion or sharing in classrooms or sharing on the streets at protests, but that I had to be part of the infrastructure and part of the planning process to making the world that I wanted to see. And lastly, I think the question that really brought me to this work was asking myself, right, and being asked in a way, what is the life that I dream about? And I want you all to think about that, and ask yourselves that today, right? What is the life that I dream about? For me, that life included cooperatives, and it included me owning my labor, my power, owning all the parts of myself that understood labor to be one thing, through being and working in nonprofits, but really having a desire for that to look and feel different. What I needed to release to get here, to the point that I just shared before, was one, shifting my relationship to power. Shifting my relationship to money, and shifting my relationship to what it meant to build futures. And in a little while, I'm going to share a little bit about my co-ops and how we came to them. But before even getting into the work, I really had to, sit down and think about what it meant to co-own businesses with my best friends, to co-own businesses with my partner, in life and in business, and how those relationships were going to shift once we started to create something new for the world. So for me, why co-ops matter, wanted to share. White supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, heteronormativity, etc. has robbed BIPOC people, especially Black and Indigenous folks, of everything. And cooperatives allow for us to take that back. To take back our time, our labor, our wellness, our wealth, and our futures. They allow us to dream and create without bounds or limits. And one of the things that I want to capture here is when things happen within my co-ops, within cooperatives, we shift, right? I am currently in the Bronx in New York. And one thing that I've seen during COVID especially is cooperatives jumping into action to what people need. I've seen and been a part of creating food pantries, sending out care packages to frontline organizers who were brutalized by police. I've seen us provide housing, open up our spaces for organizing, et cetera, et cetera. And this is in direct response to one, like, concern for community, right? The cooperative principle, but also the ability to know that without our community being well, that we're not well, and vice versa. If we're not well, then our communities are not well. And that really grounded and showed up in real ways, not just during COVID, but even before then. So a little bit about my co-ops, which Leila shared earlier. Cars by Day, which is a stationary cooperative that's really grounded in healing justice and social justice, and thinking about what that looks like. And Rebellious Root. And in both spaces, I think we strive and work towards what it means to take care of each other, and what it means and looks like to slow down when we need to and speed up when we need to, and that we're laying the groundwork for all the spaces that did not take care of us, and we're laying the groundwork to really build the foundation for the world that we want to see, in both the spaces. The next space that I want to share and close out on is I am the Advocacy Council Coordinator at the New York City Network of Worker Co-ops. And recently we launched a policy platform called The Future is Cooperative, which Rebecca was a part of building. And in this space and this platform really is, I would say, a love letter to New York and to worker co-ops. It was a culmination of worker co-ops saying, this is what we want and this is what we need in order to thrive. And it really does pull together all the love that so many people pour into cooperatives in New York, and all the possibilities that can and will exist if we can come together to make it happen. So I wanted to share those three examples, both of both my co-ops and this one, to say that, the finding out your why, and the finding out the reason and the things that drive the motivation behind what got you to this work is really lays the groundwork and the foundation for how well and how held you'll feel in the work that you do. And we really wanted to have a space for you all to think about and talk about and be in the heart space, because this work does come from the heart, and it does come from a place of not just a desire to see something different, but the knowing that if we're not the ones to do it, right, and the reason why we're doing it is for us right now, but also the future generations, right? And that we have a responsibility to them to do that. And just want to name that I do this work specifically for Black women, girls, and femmes, because we deserve better. And this is another picture of little me. And and I always think about her, and the dreams that she had, and never want to let that down. And also the dreams of so many people that were stolen early, and that I want their dreams to live on too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadé. I was caught for a moment by McKee's face, and I needed a moment to breathe. Okay, here we go. One of the things that I neglected to do was offer the praxis questions. Naughty facilitator. So I'm going to offer those now as an invitation to start your juices flowing again. And they have been flowing beautifully in the chat, by the way. I've done my best to capture some of these questions so we can bring them back up. But in response to what Sadé was just saying, one of the questions we wanted to offer you to take root inside of you is, what do we need to let go of in order to get free? You know, I may be Arab American, I may be queer, I may be many things, but I am also deeply indoctrinated in patriarchal and white supremacist culture, and examining what needs to be weeded out in order for more fruitful plants to grow is the work of a lifetime for anyone like me, but for all of us. So what do you need to let go of in order to get free so that our heart spaces can connect at work as well as at home? I will mention that one of our praxis questions for Tobin's section was echoed in the more recent reflections, which is, can you have deep conversations with whoever you're in working relationship with, paid, unpaid, cooperative, non-cooperative? What is your relationship to power, and what is your relationship to money? Power and money. And then another praxis question can be, you know, we're not all going to be in the position or choose to be in the position of working as a cooperator, or at least not through the length of our lives. But how can each of us apply the cooperative principles we were exposed to as much of our work as possible? How can we contribute in some way that is meaningful to us, to the growth of this way of organizing economic activity and creating livelihoods? So I'll leave those questions with you in a moment. And I do want to mention we've had some great back and forth. So instead of going to our framing questions, I'd like to actually start with what you were asking in the chat thread first, if that's okay with you, Rebecca, Tobin, Sadé. Okay. So Nikki and Brianna, and I think a couple of others, were posing questions about the ways in which patriarchal and white supremacist culture are so deeply embedded in the ways that we relate and work that they show up in things like agenda setting. Nikki asked, have you heard a concept about how managing meetings and setting agendas can be steeped in whiteness? That and many other phenomena that we are accustomed to accept as normal. Brianna said something really powerful and important. She said, forgive me, I don't want to misgender you. Brianna said there can be two aspects of whiteness in laboring with each other that I have witnessed. We are all aware of the hyper-capitalist corporation work environment. The other I've witnessed is the nonprofit social service collaborative work environment, where there's a lot of roundabout talking, lack of direct taking of action, quelling of conflict, usually the quelling of Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices. I'm interested if others navigate this. For the panelists, how does conflict work among cooperators? So let's just start with power and with white supremacy and patriarchy, right in the middle. How does conflict work? Rebecca, Sadé, Tobin, reflect as you will. I didn't beat you into it. I know.
No, it's okay. I know that on my agenda, Sadé is going to facilitate a section about the panelists. So I wanted to make sure if there's something Sadé wants to lead with, or I can go into I can talk about how conflict works.
Go for it, Rebecca.
I'm conflict averse. I think many of us are. But if you use, again, the metaphor of nature, just I said earlier, if you weren't on at the beginning, nature's laws are all that matters. After a fierce storm, a lot of things happen on this planet. A lot of things happen when nature behaves in a way that might look like conflict. And there are so many metaphors. You can pick yours, what a seed looks like when it suddenly bursts open. I mean, there are so many, but the thing is, we can look at conflict as a gift. We're not trained on how to handle it. But one of the most important tools, I would say, is one I think my kids learned in nursery school. We have 2 ears and only one mouth. Maybe I should listen more than I talk. So I just want to say, active listening is an amazing tool. Active listening means you listen, you don't think about what you're going to say next, because the only thing you say next is you repeat what you heard, and you say to the other, did I get you right? Is there anything else you want to say? That is a very important healing protocol when we aren't having conflict. But, it's how do you apply it in a business? We can go on, but Cooperative Home Care Associates just presented in my class the other night on how they handle conflict. And they presented alongside their union partners, who are the ones who are supposed to handle the grievance when it gets to the point of a grievance that the union handles. And they said it's never gone to arbitration in this company because the conflict is handled so well within the company, using this tool of active listening, using this tool of coaching, of really making sure that in a coaching approach, you set the stage to listen and hear what each person is going through and come up with something from it. There's a lot of us know nonviolent communication sort of like was birthed as a approach during the days of civil rights. SNCC did work with it. We bring up what we know. And the last thing I'll say with this, also hearkening to what we know from indigenous life and those who lived less generations ago indigenously, that being our Native American brothers and sisters and people. Here in the Northeast, the Haudenosaunee people practiced a Thanksgiving prayer when they would gather. And often they would gather to resolve conflict. But the first thing they did was they gave thanks to everything. Everything, the rock, the bee, the flower, the food, each other. And the lore is, by the time they got done thanking everything, they forgot what they gathered for in conflict. They had so much they were grateful for. So there's a sacred presencing to gratitude and listening that might actually get us way out of the capitalist paradigm of how we resolve conflict to how are we present with one another.
Thank you, Rebecca, for catching that question. I was really hoping that this is where we could return to, which is with a bit of radical self-awareness, radical self-honesty, and gratitude for the conflict as well. As for the lessons inherent in dismantling white supremacy in ourselves and in our relationships. Okay, I'm gonna shh for a moment so that Sadé, you can take over, please, and facilitate our subsequent dialogue.
Amazing. One of the things that I just wanted to share, and I'm going to share it again in the chat, is we created some tools for you all to think about some of the questions that have come up, and for you to create your own roadmap for what this new world or what cooperation looks like in your community, or what liberation means to you. So these are some tools that you could print out and share. And the other tool that I wanted to share is this abolitionist workbook that I had the honor of creating alongside other young people that walks you through all the things that we need in order to be in the abolitionist world. One of them, the chapter that I wrote, is around cooperatives. And it's around thinking about what are the systems that need to be dismantled and destroyed for us to get to this world. So please, they're in the chat, take a look. Hopefully they can be sent out after to folks who are watching this in the after hours. But wanted to just open up the space to Tobin or Rebecca or folks in the chat want to share. I would love to know what's the work that ground you in this. What are the things that ground you in this work? If you had to pick one or a few, what are the things that keep you here? As you heard, there are ebbs and flows and ups and downs of this work. But what is it that keeps you here? Yeah, go ahead, Tobin.
Thanks for that question. I think that passion about our work is really, really important. And personally, this is just totally personal, but I love learning and I love having my mind changed. I love coming into a situation with what I think is the way to go and then finding out that I was wrong. And I especially love that process in the context of the messy soup of shared dialogue. Where nobody knows where we're going, but we eventually arrive somewhere beautiful and unexpected. And that just keeps me so curious and so alive in my work. And in a cooperative context, it happens many times a day. And I would be totally blown away from Zoom fatigue if I hadn't been doing most of my Zoom calls in a cooperative and generative kind of way.
Thank you. And Rebecca?
It's a recognition of a spiritual presence, really, that I believe we all are one. I believe we all are one. And we don't live like that because it's an individualistic society, and I've got to make sure I have my bank account and my house and my children are cared for and all of this. But my bigger calling, and it is like, my God is we are one. And so how do I care for anybody I don't know as the part of us? And that's my big calling. I think it's taken this many years for me to own it because I thought I was just a hippie, and I'll say just a hippie when I was, growing up, and I was like attracted to the hippie folks. And I was attracted to Native American lore, and I was attracted to other things. I thought I was just a hippie, but I'm not just a hippie. I really sacredly believe we are connected. And I think that that age of Aquarius that we are now just entered means we have to practice this in this fractal way more and more. So if I see you and you see me, and I believe that's part of our connective tissue to the oneness, that's cool. And if I can do it at work, great. When those moments happen.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I 100% agree with all of that, with all of what y'all said. And I think for me is as a worker owner of two cooperatives and being able to see how much we've been able to grow and stay committed to the work, even when our workshops are meant to be in person and we have to shift to being online, but that the desire to still hold space and to continue to hold our community is so much stronger than any screen can hold, and that's those are the things that keep me. That community is beautiful and wide and deep, and that can't be replicated, and that the movement is us, right? The movement is within us, and there are no barriers that we can't overcome when we're not together. So thank you all for sharing that. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'm going to do my best to share them out. one of the next thing that I wanted to ask, and I can model this, are what are some things that we need to release in order to get free? This is to the panelists. People in the chat can also respond to this. But what are the things that we need to release in order to get free? For me, I think one of the things is this idea of having to be perfect, or having to perform, and in that performance feeling like I am not enough, and stepping into the fact that, one, I am enough, I am more than enough, and that in order for me to hold space for people and hold space for a future world, that I also need to exude enoughness to the people in my community. And recognizing that, and being in that discomfort, and also being able to be open about it, right, with y'all, is a step in saying that, one, individual healing also happens in community. That there's power in collective care and collective healing, and collective space. And so I want to leave you with that, and also pass it over to Rebecca and Tobin and Leila, if you want to share. What are things that you need to release in order to get free?
I will just very quickly flash up what I'm seeing in the chat. Things to release to get free coming out from Rebecca. Ego, vehicles, scarcity mentality, control, judgments, investment in ownership of anything other than our social and ecological footprint and the impact of that. It's powerful. I have to release that I must physically be in the epicenters to do the work. Dollars. Rebecca, Tobin, what would you add?
You know, I put ego in there and you mentioned it, but it really is a very, very small word for a big idea. And Sadé referenced it also, like, you know, needing to be correct, needing to have it right. Things like shame are really connected to ego, rather like, I don't want to be seen as not good enough. What is all that? If we really see ourselves as interconnected and not just like nature, but of nature, there is no such thing as perfect. There just is no such thing. It's just a constant thing. And so how do we allow ourselves and see each other for that? It's very big to think that we can undo ego. And I believe that it's a big part of capitalism and colonialism, all bundled up into me-ism. And I would love to release it in this lifetime, but it may take several generations. You know, I want to shout out that, you know, one of the words we used when we were designing this workshop was, how do we prefigure the world we want to see? So if daily I can meditate on giving up a little bit of my ego, hallelujah, I got it, you know, it'll take time.
There's a trio of responses in the chat that I think intertwines really beautifully and really powerfully, for me at least. So letting go of insecurity, lack of faith in positive change, and injustice. It's so easy to get and to feel stuck in the unjust and very painful status quo, including the status quo idea that we're not good enough to shift systems when we are, collectively. Tobin.
Yeah, Leila, you kind of said it, but I'll just add, we need to let go of the idea that somebody's going to do it for us. The idea that the government is doing it wrong, that the idea that our employers are doing it wrong. It's time for us to do it for ourselves.
Thank you for that, Tobin. Yeah, and that in the doing it is also, you get to find time for yourself to rest. I 100% this week was like, actually, there's no way that as a Black person, I can show up as a full person with all the things that are going on in the world, and the expectation of that is white supremacist, period, right? And it's recognizing when it takes time to step up and to step back and say, these are the times where I, as X person, need to step up and really take on this role. And then there's times that it's like, actually, you get to step back, right? And you get to let others lead. And that we are in a movement that's very leaderful, right? And that co-ops offer the blueprint for what a leaderful movement looks like. So with that, I want to pass it over to Leila to close us out. I was really honored to be here and to speak with y'all. I love all the comments in the chat. Everyone that messaged me about emailing me, yes, please do reach out and stay in contact. And I'm honored to be here.
Thank you, Sadé. Whew. This is good. We have 3 or 4 minutes, and what we wanted to end with was a brief reflection from each of our panelists, any reflection they wanted to offer. But if you want to take this framing, feel free, because this is for all of us, our panelists and our participants all together. How can we take what we are learning and doing around cooperatorness into other realms of our life? Anyone who wants to pick that up or pick up whatever their final thought was to be, feel free.
I'll offer as a start. We all already doing it. We have to see where we're doing it. We may not be in a cooperative business, but we may be doing something cooperatively, and because things travel fractally, that. So shine the light on the things that we're doing that comport with the principles of cooperativism, behave in these ways, that, and build institutions, companies. I know in the chat someone said is a corporation, could be a co-op. A corporation is that's just a creation inside law as we now have it. Any entity of people working together becomes that. And we do also have to sort of, make payday on Friday. So you have to play that game in this way, because that's what we have to use money to pay our rent and buy food and whatnot. But all those things, if we view gratitude and appreciation along the way, we may be fractally building exactly what we want to do.
Thank you, Rebecca. Tobin, Sadé?
I'll just say cooperation is an art form, a heart form, a skill. And I think maybe if we think along the lines of how much practice it takes to play a musical instrument beautifully in an ensemble, and we know what work we have cut out for us, how much work and how beautiful it can be.
Amen. Sadé?
I would say check in with your heart. Ask yourself every morning, how is your heart doing? What are things that I can put forth with love and with just radical transformation in mind. I'm an artist and often think in color, if you couldn't tell by my slides. But that sometimes the answers that we're looking for are already within us. And it's just a matter of asking the right question. Thank you.
Thank you. I really love what McKee said, so I'm going to bring that up before the group from the chat, which is this is a way of working that involves returning home. Capitalism does not own worker ownership. We do. This is how economia, the original Greek, we manage our economy. We manage our resources collectively and always have. And as soon as we've dismantled capitalism, we'll be able to do it in the cleanest and most beautiful way. But the truth is that cooperative work is both old and new, and maybe the longest lasting way for us to be interdependent truly and interresponsible, both in this intermediate stage, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, and then in the future that we want to build. So together, I look forward to returning home. Thank you so, so much for the lively discussion and for joining us. Thank you for your time.
And I want to jump in to thank Leila for moderating this session, to all three of the panelists for just a profound conversation, and to you for being here and the amazing chat that happened. Please do save that chat, and please join me in the next session that happens in 1 minute. It's rethinking municipal land and building use for people's critical needs. And to cut to the chase, y'all, they're talking about imagining basically seizing all those ridiculous golf courses in and around New York City and turning them into community spaces to build food or to grow and distribute food. Yeah, remember, you have to close out here and click the next session. I see many faces who have been through this session. If it's your first time, close this one, go back to the website and just click the next Zoom. Bye, everyone.